my friends, I'm Rick and this is your seat at the table, and we are looking at the Complete Psionics Handbook for Advanced Dungeons & Dragons Player's Handbook, 2nd Edition's Rules Supplement. Yeah, that's all up there, folks. That's the whole thing up there on top, right? Still working on that. So, think about it. Way back in the day, and I don't remember if it was 1st Edition's Dungeon Master's Guide. And I want to think it was, because I don't recall psionics coming up in Blue Book or Blue Edition or the red basic or the blue expert set. I don't remember psionics being a thing. I know that when it was introduced, it was like this appendix section in the back, and it was just a few pages of additional rules, because I don't know why. Because we had a already well-established understanding concept of magic, both clerical magic and wizard magic. The idea that we needed to add yet a third power was confusing, and I was a young person at that time, so psionics was not something I really understood, let alone got into. It wasn't until I got a little older that I started understanding the concepts behind psionics, and how, as a dungeon master, I learned to hate it. I really didn't like psionics in a lot of ways, because in some aspects, unlike magic, it's actually very narrow field, narrow focused. There's not a lot of ways to add additional material to it to make it more interesting at that time, especially if you know nothing about it at all. And then you're trying to compare it to magic, which is a terrible thing to do. It's a fallacy. And that's a first mistake a lot of people will do, is trying to compare psionics to magic, because while they do similar things, the methods and meaning and mythology behind it, no, is not even in the same category. Then we didn't see a whole lot of stuff about it. And then so 2nd edition comes out, and they come out with an entire book. And so the book gives us a deeper view, a little bit more better understanding. And it's through this book that I started to really see the nuances of being a psionicist, and the challenges being a dungeon master who has one or more psionicists within their group, because usually the only real counter for a psionicist is another psionicist. So if you go around with psionic ability, and most of your average opponents that you're going to run up against have very little or no ability to defend against it, and that's such an advantage. It's such an advantage that it can be actually a disadvantage, because sometimes the players will get too cocky with it, or they misunderstand the nuances behind it. The other side is that trying to come up with, if you're not into psionics, trying to come up with, as a dungeon master, as the game master, making a campaign that's challenging and interesting and well balanced to your players, when you have one or more psionicists in there, can be a double challenge, because now you're trying to sell yourself on something you really didn't want to deal with in the first place. The thing is that you need to be able to figure, if I got a psionicist, now I need to have, if I have a psionicist in the group, now I need to account for at least 1 out of 5 or 6 encounters that involve somebody else who has psionic abilities, or creatures that have psionic abilities. And it's not until you start getting into that realm of psionics do you start to appreciate the options that are available, because there are quite a few races that use psionics, and quite a few magical beasts and ethereal beings that also use psionics, and it's just the options expand much greater from there. It's still one of those things where you kind of either got to really love it or you don't, and you got to be willing to work with it, because once again, it can be confusing and it can be a challenge, especially when you're trying to not stumble over a psionicist and a magic user, because there's always that one person, that one player who thinks, well, I want to be a wizard and I want to be a psionicist too. You can you even do that? Well, you can, but it gets complicated. So how complicated of a character do you really want? I'm just saying, it's a good book. I learned quite a bit from it. I still have never really acquired a taste for psionics in general. I think they're more portable to other game systems. If you have a game system that already has it's heavily based magic system or heavily established magic system, adding yet another thing, it's just kind of, I don't know, overkill. I mean, on the other hand, I have had other game systems where this makes perfectly good sense. So if you look at Star Trek, the role-playing game, for example, or you really look at games like Traveller and Space Opera, their idea concept for the Force in space is psionics. In a lot of ways, that's what it is. It's a power of the mind, and not of a entity of a third party source. Although with the midi-chlorians and stuff, when it comes to the Force, anyway, I'm not getting down there. So it's a good book. I don't know, they're kind of rare from what I understand now. And it's definitely something if you really want to get deep into understanding how psionics work and how you can apply them. I've had probably more uses with this book, ironically, as a guidebook for other systems, space-based game systems, for example, than where we're trying hard to avoid the magic, because that's also a trip. You can trip over that too, where you're creating a space-based science fantasy game where you can have a little bit of everything going on, but the idea of having space wizards flinging fireballs and lightning bolts around, it takes a considerable amount away from it being a spacey, futuristic kind of game system. On the other hand, when they start using powers of the mind and projecting things, whatever. So, anyhow, till next time, I'm Rick. You're not. Have yourself a great weekend.